So I think she's loaded up. Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted to, in the meantime, while we're waiting, quick heads up, there's ranked choice voting for the mayoral election, but there's no ranked choice voting for the district attorney. So you only get to pick one person. So make sure to tune in tonight and pay close attention and figure out who your pick is going to be. The key dates to know: voter registration ends on the 28th. Early voting is June 12th to June 20th. The absentee ballot request deadline is June 15th. And the primary election day is June 22nd. So that's what all of our 8 candidates are going to be sort of vying for, is the Democratic Party nomination for the Manhattan or New York County district attorney. Just want to give a shout out to the current district attorney, Vance Jr. and his team, like Danny Frost. They made a lot of changes to push things forward in terms of criminal justice around the topic of cannabis, like not prosecuting low-level offenses. So thank you to them for that. Obviously, there's more to be done, but we appreciate his outspoken support over the past couple of years with regard to how we can undo the harms from the failed war on drugs. And everyone tonight that you're going to see is very, very qualified. They have very impressive bios, in case you haven't seen them on your. We got multiple folks chiming in. Hey Dan, how are you? We'll get you going in a little bit later tonight. So we have we have some really amazing qualified individuals, and pretty much they all could make a really incredible district attorney. Probably, so everyone that you see tonight, other than me, would be a great district attorney, and we really appreciate them joining us for CannaGather tonight. So we're going to be recording this, and we'll make the recording available to our list. And as I said a little bit earlier, we have a very exciting event coming up on June 23rd. We're going to have the great Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes and Senator Liz Krueger. So they, as you hopefully know, were the champions of the MRTA, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which is the bill that was signed by Governor Cuomo to legalize cannabis in New York State. So very honored, I should say, to be welcoming them on June 23rd. So that should be a great one. And I guess once we get Tali to join in, we'll get things started with our first candidate. Hello, Jill. Great to have you as well. Thanks for the love. Okay, I see we got some more folks tuning in. Everyone's it's a little bit later than we normally do. Normally we do it at 7, but there were some things outside of our control that made us, hello Hector, made us push to the 8:30 slot. So maybe some folks went to sleep or went out and about. But as I said, if you're not able to tune in for the whole thing, we'll make this available on YouTube, and we'll be able to share it with folks afterwards as well. So as soon as Tali hops back on, we'll get started with her, followed by Eliza, Lucy, Diana, Dan, Tahanie, sorry, Liz, and Alvin. And it should be, as I said, like I didn't necessarily have a ton of insight into who the candidates were before the campaign season really began. And then while I was compiling the bios for this page, it was phenomenally impressive. We're honored to have the first candidate, Tali Weinstein, no relation, which I guess I should probably change to Josh Weinstein, but Josh Weinstein CannaGather. Although I do want to say before we get started that everyone used to ask me if I was related to your husband because we went to the same high school and we both played chess. So although Tali and I are not related, we do share the same last name. So Tali, yes, welcome to CannaGather. Yeah, I'd love for you to sort of introduce yourself and your experience and why you're running for district attorney.
Josh, excuse me. Thank you so much for having me. And I have to say, I came on, it just said CannaGather, and you said, this is Tali Weinstein, no relation. And I thought you meant to Harvey Weinstein. And I thought, oh dear, do I have to say that?
I get that.
Wherever I go.
Yeah, I get that all the time. And I sometimes just preemptively say no relation. But in this case, it's different.
Indeed. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you and to be here with you. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. So I'm glad to tell you a little bit about myself. I always start with my immigration story, because no matter how many years go by, that is so formative for me in how I think about my framework for the world and really how I think about what is the role of law enforcement. So I arrived here on Christmas Eve of 1979 because my family had to leave Iran, where I was born, because a revolution was happening and there was so much violence. And it turned out to be lucky that we arrived on that night, a Jewish family from a Muslim country, because I now understand as a lawyer that we could have been deported on the spot. We had fake papers. We had what we needed to start a new life here. We obviously were not tourists, even though that's what our visa said. But the first American I ever met was a law enforcement officer who inspected my family at the airport and made a very humane decision. He said, it's Christmas, come on in, come back to self-deport. It was my mother, my little brother, and I. My dad was already here. And that is why I'm an American. And I have tried in my career to emulate that person and to use whatever power I've had in law enforcement to exercise the law in a way that is humane and sees the justice in every case. And that is fair. And sometimes it means prosecuting, and sometimes it means not prosecuting. I grew up to work. I'm sorry, this is my fourth Zoom tonight.
No worries.
I grew up and worked across American legal institutions. I have worked for 3 attorneys general of the United States. I've worked at the Supreme Court. I was in the leadership of the Department of Justice when, excuse me, President Obama was president, and Eric Holder hired me to be one of his counsel, one of his advisors. He has endorsed me in this race. I have worked in the leadership of city prosecution and national prosecution, and I've been a federal prosecutor, done every kind of case myself. And I bring from all of that, including those personal experiences, a conviction that we have to balance fairness and safety in what we do, and we have to enforce the law in a wise way. I want to just say a few introductory words about some of what we did around marijuana enforcement in Brooklyn, and then, to turn to you for questions. So I had the privilege of being the general counsel to Eric Gonzalez, the elected district attorney in Brooklyn. And it was during my time there that the DA, long before any change in law, decided to stop prosecuting misdemeanor marijuana possession in almost every instance. And he made this decision largely driven by the grossly racially disparate way that the law had been enforced in Brooklyn. And, initially, the police who disagreed continued to make those arrests. And important to see as an example of how prosecutors can shape policing. Eventually they stopped because they were making the arrests and we were not turning them into convictions. I also created the only program that I'm aware of in the state for expunging marijuana convictions, because the sealing law only applied to certain cases and only within a certain number of years. And we didn't think you should have to wait 10 years to have your conviction sealed if it was something we were not prosecuting anymore because it was unjust. So we created a program for people to come forward and have it completely wiped from their books. I'm really proud of the ways that we tried, even before any legislation changed, to do the right thing, because ultimately that is our job. Back to you, Josh Weinstein.
Yeah, so definitely thank you, DA Gonzalez, and the entire team for being the leader. I think he was the first in New York City to decriminalize, or stop prosecuting, I should say, and effectively decriminalize. I guess one of the questions that we have, and I thought it was pretty salient from LaMon Bland from our community was, what steps would you take to implement restorative measures for communities that have been historically affected by the failed war on drugs?
Yeah, so, it's lots of things. I mean, I think the DA has to be a voice for, justice and equity wherever she can. So, as we're thinking about what a legal marijuana industry would look like in New York, we need to stand on the side of making sure that that industry comes to life in a way that accounts for all of the harm done through enforcement in the past and demonstrates our values around restoration and equity. Even though that's not within our hands, it is something that we can stand up for. Beyond that, when I think about drug prosecutions, I am very proud that in Brooklyn also, DA Gonzalez developed a program called CLEAR that is a diversion straight from arraignment for folks who are struggling with an underlying addiction, for other kinds of drugs, obviously not marijuana. And I think that approach is one that I would like to bring to Manhattan.
Amazing. And I think one of the things that I noticed in the sort of aftermath of DA Gonzalez and Davis Jr. Announcing that they're going to stop prosecuting is that the NYPD continued to be very aggressive. And it seemed like there was a bit of a disconnect between the NYPD and the district attorney's offices with regard particularly to cannabis and cannabis enforcement. If you are elected district attorney, how do you envision your role with regard to working with the New York Police Department around cannabis enforcement and sort of reducing some of the legacy issues?
Yeah, well, but that was really interesting, Josh, because we were tracking those numbers. And as I said, there was this disagreement. So for a while, our policy changed and the PD's policy did not change, and they were still making the arrests. And we would track our declination rates, in the Early Case Assessment Bureau. And suddenly a Gulf opened up, and a huge declination rate. They were bringing cases, we were declining. And ultimately that number shrunk because this is a demonstration of how we can affect the police's arrest policy, because we are independent actors, prosecutors. So they make arrests, we turn them into criminal cases. We bring the criminal charges. If we decline to do that, then ultimately the point of making the arrest is radically diminished, right? On the other side of that, I should just say it's a little far afield from what you are committed to, but I think it is important to say that I think we also have to demand the places where we want the NYPD to do more. For example, they dedicate a very small part of their staffing to investigating sex crimes, including sex crimes against children. Part of reform is not just saying what you're not going to do, but also saying, look, this is what matters to me. This is the real harm to people. I demand that you put more people on these crimes because I'm going to prosecute them. I'm going to use my investigators to start those cases. So, it's a push and a pull.
Amazing. That sounds great. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our community?
I would love to know what your chess rating is, Josh.
So I
you don't have to answer.
Oh, I'm happy to. I just sent out a big email saying like I'm back into chess over the past month. I got very into it. I was at 2100 for a while when I graduated high school, and I sort of stayed there. And then I got very excited about becoming a master, right? Like it's like, oh, I got to become a master. And there's only 100 more rating points. And so I trained basically for a couple months. And I walked out in the middle of a tournament as soon as I calculated that I was going to break 22. So my rating is and will always be 2207.
Well, it's like passing the bar. You just have to get on the other side of passing. So that is impressive. And
now I'm a lawyer.
And I never trot this out, but I believe that I am the only candidate in the field who has 4 nationally ranked chess players in my immediate family. So how about that? I have not put it on a palm card yet, but maybe
not yet, but maybe tomorrow.
Maybe that'll be the thing that breaks it. Anyway, it was really a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. Thank you so much for coming on, and best of luck.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Okay, now we have Eliza Orlins coming on. Will licensing be discussed in this webinar? No, but you can always email me and we can chat about that. And I think that'll probably be a topic for next time. Eliza, hello. You are muted. Would you like to unmute?
Oh my
There
gosh,
you go.
that's so funny. I'm like, I haven't done that in a while. We're just so used to this Zoom life. How you doing? Good to see you.
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Good.
So let me just put Diana on hold, and now it's just the two of us. So you are the only person from the field of 8 that I knew before the race. But for everyone else, can you share a little bit about sort of your background and what got you here?
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly never anticipated running for office, let alone running for a prosecutor position. All I ever wanted to do was be a public defender. And it was the reason I went to law school, the only job I applied for. And I've spent the last dozen years being a public defender here in Manhattan. I've represented over 3,000 people charged with crimes who couldn't afford to hire an attorney. And I've really seen the cruel, unjust way our criminal legal system operates, the failed policies of the current Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and the way in which the status quo protects those who have wealth and power and connections, and meanwhile hurts the people like the people I've spent my career representing, predominantly lower income people, Black and brown people, people who are LGBTQIA, people with disabilities, those from vulnerable communities. And we just need to do better. And we're coming to like a real reckoning with the systemic racism and harms that exist within policing and prosecution. And, after the heartbreak and anger and frustration I've felt for the last dozen years, I made the decision to run for district attorney to bring about the real changes we so desperately need to see here in Manhattan.
Amazing. And then in the scope of the work that you've taken on as a public defender, have you seen cases that are related to cannabis possession, things along those lines?
Absolutely. And this is something, actually, I was in today's New York Daily News, and one of the things that they quoted me on was calling out Vance for his policies on cannabis. And basically it was, I want to say summer 2018. This huge press conference. He brought in all the media. He closed down a courtroom on the 5th floor of 100 Center Street. And he proudly announced that day, we will no longer be prosecuting simple possession of marijuana. We're no longer going to prosecute that misdemeanor, the 22110. And everyone touted him as, progressive. Oh, this is so great. Vance is doing this thing. It's so fantastic. And meanwhile, I was working as a public defender, I got reached out to for a comment, and I said, sure, if that's what really happens, then that is good news. But unfortunately, I was right to be wary of his proclamations because I've seen it too many times before. And that very night, I walk into night court. I walk into arraignments. We work round the clock every day of the year, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. for arraigning cases. And I walk into night court at 5 p.m. and the very first case I pick up, my client is charged with nothing more than possession. He's been in custody for 23 hours and Vance's office is not declining to prosecute this case. So, I'm of course furious, and I take to Twitter and I'm like, at Gothamist, at Vice, like, you may want to fact check this, like what's really happening on the ground. Here I am in the trenches representing people who are still being charged. And ultimately, Vance's press person saw my tweet because it started getting traction, sent me a direct message saying, Eliza, give me the docket number. I thought he was questioning the veracity of my tweet. And I was like, of course this is real. It's docket ending in 333. And before I know it, they're like, who's the attorney on this docket? And I was like, oh, that's my case. Why? They call the case and they're like, the people moved to dismiss in the interest of justice. But had I not been the lawyer, had I not been the person calling this out publicly and making sure that it was known that this isn't what they were doing, would there have been the same outcome? This is someone who has repeatedly, made progressive promises and then not upheld them. And I think that's the fear with a lot of my opponents is now that it's become popular to talk about progressive talking points, people are now saying the things that I've been saying for my entire career, but we have to make sure that we elect someone who truly has the authentic commitment to bringing about these changes we so desperately need to see.
Well, I'm glad that Danny was able to come to the rescue on that one. He's a good
Danny
dude.
DM'd me.
It sounds like it's so good for him and good for you and good for the person that you were working with on that sad case. I mean, I think that to your point, it's critical to shine a light. It may be not a function of you per se, but the fact that you went to social media and shone a light on that case was able to bring about justice for your client. And I guess sort of going back to the same question that was asked previously by LaMon Bland is sort of what steps will you take if you switch to the other side from defender to the prosecutorial side as district attorney, what will you do to sort of right the wrongs of the failed war on drugs?
Well, as we know, the war on drugs has been nothing more than a war on people, and that, you know, has predominantly impacted Black and brown people. And I've seen it over and over again with my clients. And so, you know, I've taken a very hard stance on this with regards to declining to prosecute drug possession, period. And even some low-level drug sales, because I've seen the way in which these sales are not trafficking as people would fearmonger and have you believe, but are really people who are either possessing for personal use or possessing, you know, who are suffering from a substance use disorder and hand over some small amount of drugs and then are facing sale of a narcotic charges and state prison time. That is not keeping us safe. That's not advancing equity and justice. That's you know, injecting the criminal legal system into issues of public health sometimes when someone is, you know, in need of treatment or help. So, you know, I think that we need a prosecutor who is dedicated to truly, you know, limiting the reach of the prosecutor's office. I want to go in there and figure out ways of giving away and ceding power and making sure that, you know, the promises that I'm making are things that I'm able to effectuate by saying, here are the ways in which I'm going to shrink the footprint of the DA's office. You know, I'm not going to prosecute these cases, period. It's not, you know, promising some diversion and mandating people and making sure, you know, having this other arm of the criminal legal system that's still a massive intrusion into people's lives, and not everyone needs treatment. So, you know, in enforcing those things is also problematic. So I think we need to make sure that we have someone who's truly dedicated to fighting back against the racist war on drugs.
Amen. And I guess one last question for me is, like, how do you envision the interplay between you as district attorney and the NYPD around the enforcement around these issues?
Well, so I think that the NYPD issue is obviously a complicated one. They have been.
That's why I asked the question.
And yeah, well, it's a good question, Josh.
Thank you.
They've been an absolute, you know, they've been a huge obstacle to progress in so many ways. They really have fought back against even the mildest of reforms and accountability measures. They've really continued to, you know, mount these aggressive policing procedures that brutalize and harass and attack members of the community. So, you know, I think that there will certainly be a transition period, but ultimately, I think that they're going to be bought in because most people don't become police officers wanting to arrest someone for drug possession or someone who's experiencing mental health issues. They don't want to respond to those things. They actually would prefer not to. And so by saying, hey, let's let you do your job, let's let you address serious crime and not, in fact, go after people for these low-level offenses will hopefully, you know, bring about some positive feelings about my tenure as district attorney. But, you know, I have been an outspoken critic, and I'm not going to, you know, allow the NYPD to continue to operate with impunity, whether it comes to, you know, the physical assaults that we're seeing on the streets, or also the testifying that we see in the courthouse. You know, so many times police officers would say that the reason why they searched my client, you know, they would tailor their testimony in a way to deliberately nullify constitutional objections. You know, when there was a legitimate violation of the Fourth Amendment, they would say, "Oh no, I saw this this drug sale happen. I saw this. You know, I observed this drug sale that someone was just, you know, wide open spaces, not being covert at all, just handing over drugs." So, you know, it's really, I think, being sure that police officers aren't able to just lie with impunity when it comes to their testimony as well is something that's really important for our next DA.
I think that sounds like music to everyone's ears. Eliza, thank you so much, and for all the work that you've done. Anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I'm the only public defender in the race. I'm running the only grassroots campaign. We just hit over 10,000 individual contributions. So if there's anyone watching who agrees with our message, what I'm going up against. I know that Ms. Weinstein is speaking before me, and she's someone who is funded by millionaires and billionaires and Trump donors and Ted Cruz donors, and is trying to buy this election with the millions of dollars. And I'm running a truly grassroots campaign, so would love for people to get involved, make a contribution, or really volunteer. We have this unbelievable grassroots army all over Manhattan, and would love to see folks out there. They can check me out at elizaorlins.com.
Awesome. Well, Eliza, thank you so much for joining, and best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for organizing, and thanks for all your work on these important issues.
Trying. Long way to go. All right. Thank you, Eliza. Have a good night.
Take care.
All right. Okay. I think Lucy is up next, I believe. Lucy Lang. Lucy, hello.
Hello.
You were like very well shot or like squared away for Zoom. Like I have like sort of part of a picture and like part of a lamp, and you've got like the campaign poster. You're prepared.
I've been doing this for a minute now.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, I'd love to. We've never connected before, so I'd love to learn about you and have you share a little bit about yourself with everyone in the CannaGather community.
Awesome. Well, I'm Lucy Lang, and I have run a national criminal justice reform organization where I worked with communities and district attorneys across the country on implementing the kinds of reforms Manhattanites are calling for. I've also served as an assistant district attorney handling the most serious, complex, violent crimes right here in Manhattan. And that work has really led me to the recognition of the fact that the role of the district attorney encompasses far more than prosecution alone. And in furtherance of that, as an assistant district attorney, I created a first of its kind college and prison program to bring assistant district attorneys inside New York's prisons to work on criminal justice reforms alongside incarcerated New Yorkers, and together develop ideas for change. That model of leadership is something I commit to as district attorney and has informed my campaign every step of the way. There are candidates in this race who are beholden to Wall Street. There are candidates who are beholden to the political establishment. My campaign is informed by and supported by the people most impacted by the criminal justice system, victims of violent crime, families who lost loved ones to police violence, including Sean Bell's family, alongside whom I crafted a plan for police accountability at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, survivors of sexual abuse by Harvey Weinstein, with whom I created a plan for a revamped sex crimes unit, and progressive district attorneys across the country who are doing the work of implementing these reforms. I'm particularly proud amongst those to count the endorsement of Baltimore's Marilyn Mosby, who has effectively stopped prosecution of substance misuse and is taking what is I believe, the future of that kind of conduct in this country into the public health system where it truly belongs. So I'm committed to a district attorney's office that melds my deep expertise in criminal justice here in Manhattan with the deep community work that I have done alongside communities most impacted, including in and after incarceration, and building a criminal justice system that prioritizes the dignity of every New Yorker.
That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, I've visited 2 different prisons, and it's really profound experience. I love that you're bringing those ADAs and other people from the office to prisons. I hope that it changes them as it did me. Could you share a little bit about your experience around cannabis and cannabis policy and cannabis cases?
Sure. When I started at the district attorney's office, I handled appeals and then moved into the trial division where I handled mostly felony matters. So I really didn't tend to handle marijuana cases. And I was at the office during the time when the office made the decision to stop prosecution of marijuana, which I was certainly in favor of. And I applaud all of the efforts that I'm sure so many folks in the room tonight and so many others have committed to changing the law, and look forward to standing alongside you in that.
Amazing. And I think one of the challenges and opportunities as we have legalized in New York State is to undo the sort of ills that were caused by the failed war on drugs. That goes back to sort of our guest question from LaMon Bland about,
LaMon.
Oh, you know LaMon, amazing. I actually haven't met LaMon, but he just today submitted this question. I was like, that is perfect. So yeah, LaMon's question was around sort of, what steps will you take to undo the harms caused by the failed war on drugs and restore those communities?
It is absolutely top of mind for me, in part, and I'm going to answer in several ways, but because one of my former students who served 8 years in prison for a violent crime he committed when he was under the influence of drugs, was released, had a great job, was very successful, engaged to be married, and he was stopped during a car stop a couple of months ago and found to have a PCP in the car, and not accused of being of having used it at all, but he was violated by parole and is currently locked up for that violation of parole. And that is the kind of thing that we have to commit to stop doing, to stop violating people for technical violations that have no bearing on public safety. But to LaMon's broader question about righting the wrongs of the past, I am committed to a district attorney's office that is an engine for dismantling mass incarceration, because it has been an engine for getting us to the unconscionable state that we are in now, and that also commits to reckoning with this country's legacy of racial injustice, and that includes around marijuana prosecution. So amongst the strategies I intend to employ, and I have actually put forth a comprehensive policy book, show and tell, with more than 27 policies that I intend to implement. And I've committed those policies to paper, Josh, because I want it to be clear how deeply I know this system and how clearly I see the path to implementation. But more importantly, that it will serve as a kind of report card for you, so that when I'm district attorney, you can call on me and say, on page 27, you committed to this and you haven't done it yet. Because the black box of prosecution is part of how we find ourselves in this mess, that we haven't been able to hold prosecutors accountable because we simply don't know what's happening behind those walls. So one of the plans that I have committed to in there, and there is a comprehensive plan on addressing racial injustice, but that goes to this question, is building what I am calling a retroactive review unit. And that's a much more expansive model than the kind of conviction integrity unit that we have seen start to crop up in other jurisdictions in the country, and that others in my race have committed to. This would be a unit that not just addresses issues like exoneration of wrongful convictions, be they factual or legal, that also then employs what's known as a sentinel event review. So assessing what went wrong when a case is identified as a wrongful conviction, and then creating policies to prevent that kind of error or conduct from happening again. And the unit will also look at existing sentences that are out of step with current norms, where people are serving longer sentences than is consistent with what we believe is right now, and seek to rectify that either through seeking clemency or through other means of legal sentence reduction. And to this very precise question, that unit will also be charged with looking back at the incredible litany of cases that people have been wearing around their necks for generations for conduct that is no longer considered criminal, and will be responsible for mass sealings and expungement of those convictions.
Well, expungements being the key word, so looking forward to that and appreciate your dedication. One last question. NYPD, I mean, obviously, if you were working with in the DA's office already, you have purview and visibility into that relationship. What do you think would be, I guess, different or similar about how you would work with NYPD as district attorney?
I'm really honored to have the support and endorsement of Commonwealth Attorney Stephanie Morales in Portsmouth, Virginia. And amongst the remarkable things that she has done as one of the wave of progressive prosecutors who've been elected across the country is to, in fact, herself try and receive a conviction of police officers for killing 2 young Black men in her community. And what she says about this question is really interesting and different from the way other people think about it. She says, I don't know why people always say that a district attorney can't possibly hold police accountable because she works with them every day. I should be as connected to every member of my community as I would ever be to any police officer, such that it should be as hard for me to prosecute anyone as it would ever be to prosecute a police. So the way I see this, and again, I have a police accountability strategy set forth, but the way I see this really is in the converse about community engagement and about making sure that the public understands transparently what the job of the district attorney's office is, what kinds of cases the district attorney is going to handle, what the outcomes are likely to be, makes public demographic data cross-referenceable with the with case level data so that the public can actually search and say, oh, you're more likely to be indicted as a person of color for a grand larceny case than you are as a white person. And that must not stand. And so we're going to hold the district attorney to account. So all of that goes towards building a culture of accountability in which the district attorney, who certainly has to work with the police on handling cases and investigations, as I have throughout my career, the district attorney does neither is in bed with the police nor gives the public the impression that she is. And that's the district attorney, the independent district attorney I will be, as evidenced by the way I've built this campaign, informed by the people most impacted, not seeking support from the political establishment, and really trying to center the voices of a wide range of community members. And I hope to have the opportunity to do that alongside all of you.
Cool. So we're out of time, but appreciate you joining us. Is there anything else that you'd like to add very quickly?
No.
Okay.
I'm
pretty comprehensive
to talk to you, and I look forward to meeting you socially, perhaps at a smoking lounge one day.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that was pretty comprehensive. So I'm sure we can all check out more on your website as well. So Lucy, thank you so much and for all of your work. Best of luck in the race.
Thank you. Follow me at Lucy Lang NYC, and there's more information at votelucylang.com. Be safe and well. Perfect.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. That was great. We have Diana Florence coming up next as soon as she's ready. Maybe she's getting ready. Surprise.
I'm here.
Diana, how are you?
Good. How are you? Sorry, I was finishing a call. I took advantage of the extra time. Thank you.
No, I figured. We just appreciate you joining. I know it's hectic. I know it's getting late, and you also have like a great Zoom shot. So maybe this is just the trend. Is like all of you are like very well prepared when it comes to your Zoom backgrounds.
Yeah, we don't know any different. We've only campaigned in the age of Zoom. It will be nice to see what it's like in celluloid 3D.
Exactly. I like that. I like that. So yeah, Diana, would love to learn. I mean, I know a little bit from your bio, but for everyone else attending and people that are going to watch on demand, tell us about yourself and why you're running for DA.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, my name is Diana Florence, and I am the person in the race that has the most experience. I have 25 years of prosecution, and it's not simply about doing prosecution the same old way. That's not how I conducted myself throughout my career. I spent 5 years doing domestic violence, working side by side with women and kids to make sure that we found justice however it formed itself, whether it was doing the traditional case, whether it was finding document crimes, always working with the people, serving the public truly. But the bulk of my career was doing complex corruption cases, whether it involved gun trafficking and international contraband, companies that killed workers, stole their wages, even corporate executives who falsified the safety tests of our buildings like World Trade Center, Yankee Stadium, and Second Avenue Subway. I have a deep understanding of the criminal law, the state criminal law, and how to actually use it to advantage all people. I'm here supported by 20 labor unions. That means bus drivers, sanitation workers, construction workers. You know, they've endorsed me not because of who I know or my connections, but because of the work I've done. I understand how to build the coalitions, break those silos and work with our community to make sure that the work is paramount and that we all get justice, no matter who we are and how much money we have. So that's a little bit about who I am, and I'm excited to talk about an issue. You know, I think I'll just say this before I let you sort of take back over. of all the candidates, I'm the only one who's actually really engaged on cannabis. I wrote an op-ed, and I think deeply about it. It's not because, I had any particular, familiarity. It's just that I understand a regulation, I understand the criminal law, and I understand the pitfalls that are to come. I can anticipate. So I'm excited to answer your questions on this particularly important and topical topic.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I guess just keep going, like cannabis. Tell us more.
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think that, the simplistic view of cannabis is that, for too long, obviously it's been over criminalized in some communities, and other communities it's been sort of look the other way. You can use it. And reality is, the whole construct of criminalizing cannabis, was racist and wrong on its face. So now we've arrived at a point in our history where we say, okay, we finally in New York State, and it embarrasses me as a very proud, maybe slightly obnoxious New Yorker, that we're not first. We should have been really leading the forefront. But here we are, sort of middle of the pack, and we're about a year or so away from legalizing it. Well, many of my opponents in this race think that that's the end of the story. We're done. I understand, having done complex corruption, that's the beginning of the case. That is the beginning of the conversation. So when I think about cannabis legalization, it's not simply about flipping a switch and saying now that, there's going to be the Duane Reade and the cannabis dispensary on the corner. It's about thinking about those legacy sellers who have had a thriving business for many, many years. And, if the legacy user is used to paying, let's say, $50 or so for an eighth, are they really going to want to pay $85, right? How do we actually incentivize the legacy user to pay a little more? And how do we incentivize the legacy seller to enter the legal market? And we can already see 3 steps ahead that the corporate, the big corporate interests who are going to do everything right with check all the boxes for compliance are going to be sort of pounding their fists saying, arrest them, right? We're doing everything right. We're paying our taxes. Our product is safe and regulated. How can you let this go on? So before we go to criminalization 2.0, we need to have a district attorney who's thought about this and a way to actually, go to the next level, making sure that we bring into compliance those legacy dealers and those legacy users.
Well, clearly you've thought a lot about it, so that's awesome. I was just thinking, like, if you have the answer to that sort of quandary, then you shouldn't be running for DA. You should be running for governor, because we need to get that guy out. You don't need to comment on that. But that's sort of the fundamental challenge of legalization, as you know, and as you described, and it's going to be an interesting 14 months or however much time we have. But you once again led to sort of the next question, which is, as legalization becomes a thing, what about equity and restoring the harms inflicted by the failed war on drugs? Per our guest, LaMon Bland, got to give him a shout for this perfect equity question. Would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Right. So like baked into the statute here in New York is there's like automatic expungement for some things, right? For possession over a certain ounce and things like that. I think we have to look at low level sale as well. And that's not something that is baked into the statute. And I think if we're saying it's okay to sell on a corporate level, we should be looking at the people that have been convicted of sale. And giving them an opportunity actually to expunge their records. And that's something as district attorney, I would actually take the lead on. To your point before, I have no aspirations for governor, but I will say—
I was half kidding.
I know, but I will say this. I do take this very seriously because I do see how that will work. And the reality is that the way it is going to work is we need to really be thinking and outside the box and bringing together, not sort of pitting the corporate, sort of cannabis industry against the legacy sellers. I think that there is a lot of synergy that you can create. And I hate that word. It's very corporate, but if you think about it. But
it's a good word. I'm with you on that. I'm with you.
Yeah. And the reality is, look, the legacy sellers, right? They have incredible client lists, right? And that's everything in business. And the corporate people are coming in. They need that corporate list. So you need to, but it can't be, sort of a power imbalance. We can be the conduit because the legacy seller will be violating the law. We can be that connector that says, look, yes, we could prosecute you, but we don't think that's really justice and equity. So to me, to answer the equity question, yes, sure, it's about expunging and using our powers to think about those things and being open to the people that have been previously harmed. But again, I'm a forward thinker. I like to think about what's to come and bringing everyone to the table and saying, okay, legacy seller, I get it. You've had a pretty good run, but you know what? It is better in the long run for you, for frankly, generations of your family to be able to inherit a business. And if we can connect you to a regulatory structure that will, deal with, frankly, your inventory, right? Because we're not going to be able to use your inventory, but we also need to compensate you. We need to be thinking all those ways. And again, I think that the Manhattan DA, one of the unique positions about that office, having done this work for 25 years, I know that when I decided that wage theft was a crime, it led to wage theft being a crime in other jurisdictions. And it was just simply the mindset change. So what we can do in the Manhattan DA's office is set the tone for the rest of the country.
That's amazing. And then I guess one last question from me is, how do you, given your experience, how do you feel, based thereon, you would interface with the NYPD around enforcement with regard to cannabis possession and other related issues that have been facing us over the past couple of years?
Yeah, so it starts with the simple proposition, right? Smell of cannabis is no longer probable cause, right? So we just have to make that very clear. It's not just saying it and putting it on t-shirts, right? It's literally going out and reinforcing that, declining to prosecute where that's an issue. And then saying, look, cannabis, it was wrongheaded to begin with. There is, again, as I said from the beginning, we know it's related to Nixon and even before him, these racist ideas. So we need to be sort of making sure that police understand that that is no longer, a basis for crime. And, just taking that out of the vocabulary. I mean, I imagine, I wasn't alive in after Prohibition, but I imagine it was similar. We might look back to the time and see how that was handled. But either way, my experience, again, I'm a 25-year prosecutor. I'm not an apologist for police, but I can tell you rank and file police officers, when you go out and you train them, when it came to workplace, issues, whether it was fatalities or injuries or, again, wage theft, what I found was when I went and trained rank and file police officers, they were all too happy to sort of change their mindset and say, okay, wait, a fight on payday may not just be a fight. It may actually lead to something more systemic. And I think that it's really about stopping the belief that the police are a monolith, that they all think a certain way, and really kind of going out and doing the work. To me, it's not work, because the greatest pleasure of being a prosecutor and being a public servant for all the years was all the people that I got to meet where they were, out in the community, at their jobs, and seeing them not, again, for the uniforms or for what they look like, but just with the daily struggles and what they wanted to achieve. And I think when you kind of go past the sort of the artifice, we can really do great things.
Cool. It would make a great t-shirt, by the way. Any last words before we kick you off unceremoniously or ceremoniously?
Well, no problem at all. No, thank you. I'm so glad we've had this conversation. I'm been, to be candid, frustrated that cannabis hasn't really been talked about much. It's really been,
I've been talking about it a lot.
Well, you guys have, and please invite me to come back, because you can see, I think about this. I think about these issues deeply. And I think that, the legalization of cannabis can lead to a lot of, sort of overdue equity, remediation. But it's really about engaging with people like yourself who've been thinking about this for years, and finally you're in the mainstream. My goal as your district attorney, I'm hoping that all of you here who are Manhattan voters will vote for me, but I'm hoping also that it's not just voting for me. To me, it's about continuing a relationship. I am not a person that will, just appear before you during election season. If you know me at all, you know that I will be maybe even a little annoying. I will always be wanting to talk. So, and I'm out there in the community. Please, please email me, reach out to me if you want to continue. I'm also really, last thing I'll say, I don't know everything about cannabis, and this is something that I've thought about a bunch, but I learn from the people who are really enmeshed in this. So if any of you feel like I'm missing something or you want to bring me some ideas, please reach out. I'm incredibly open to that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, just drop your email or website link in the chat. And thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank you. I'm just a slow typer, but I'm going to do that real fast and I'll let you get to your next.
No worries. Take your time. Thank you so much and best of luck.
Thank you.
We got Dan coming up. Thank you, Diana. We got Dan coming up. Tahanie, hello. 1 second, I'll put her on hold. I think Dan is next, if I recall. Dan is next. Dan, how are you, sir? Connecting audio. Give it a second. There we go. Hello. Dan, can you hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Great. So Dan, great to meet you. I did get an email in my inbox recently from a woman by the name of Carolyn Maloney, a congresswoman who endorsed you. She happens to be my congresswoman and my favorite congresswoman. So congratulations on the endorsement.
Thank you. She's my favorite congresswoman too.
So what did you do? What have you done in your life to merit Congresswoman Maloney's endorsement, and why are you running for district attorney?
Well, to date both the congresswoman and myself, I started my political life 29 years ago as an intern in her office.
That's amazing.
So I've known the congresswoman for the better part of 3 decades, and we work together. Our constituencies completely overlap, so we've worked together for years on transportation issues, environmental issues, community-related issues, and of course, criminal legal reform that I know she and I both believe in.
And when you say shared constituents, that's because?
That's because I'm a state legislator on the east side of Manhattan, although I grew up in Washington Heights, 193rd Street and St. Nicholas Avenue. My father, a teacher, my mother, social worker. I moved to the east side where I live today when I was 17 years old with my wife and children.
Cool. That's amazing. Yeah. Born and raised on the Upper East Side for me. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'd love to learn a little bit more about your experience with cannabis, issues of cannabis policy, particularly in the context of law enforcement as well.
Yes, since I was elected in 2011, I have been a proponent of the legalization of cannabis, and I understood early on that it was used as a wedge against communities of color, and that our complete failure to regulate this product has been devastating, both on a law enforcement issue, but also just a failure of economic policy as we trail states like Massachusetts and New Jersey. Unfortunately, New York lags behind in its effort to decriminalize. Finally, we've taken some positive steps, but we have to go much further. I'm very proud of my co-sponsorship, and I heard earlier in the call that you're going to have my state senator Liz Krueger, as well as Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes on at a different time. But it really was a long and arduous effort towards the decriminalization of marijuana that occurred in the legislature, or to get to a point of legalization. And the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, unfortunately, has a pretty sordid history over the better part of 11 years. The current practices are better, but how many thousands or hundreds of, probably thousands of people have B misdemeanors on their records because of the punitive practices of Mr. Vance in this office. And I think that's the distinguishing factor between myself and others in this race, is long before it was popular, long before it was easy, I was challenging our district attorney on issues like this, and fighting for not just marijuana legalization, but decriminalization and decarceration on a whole host of issues in Albany. It's good to be a progressive and to talk about what you would do. Um, I can talk to voters about what I have done as a guidepost to how I will operate as district attorney.
That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, I've spent a bit of time in Albany, actually by encouragement of Congresswoman Maloney, and I found it incredibly difficult and challenging. So thank you for supporting cannabis as an important issue up there, because it needs all the support it got and needed throughout the years that you were there. So thank you. I guess if you were sort of translating that experience on a going forward basis, we have that guest question, if you may have heard from LaMon Bland, is if you were elected district attorney, what type of restorative measures would you use around the communities that have been historically adversely affected by the failed war on drugs?
It's a great question by LaMon, who I know, and because the harm has been done. And what the next district attorney, and not only because of Mr. Vance's poor choices on cannabis in prosecution, but for a whole host of reasons, what my main task is, in a large sense, is to undo the harm. And how do we go about doing that? We do that in a couple ways. One, expungement of records. And as you know, with the cannabis legalization or decriminalization in the legislature, we automatically expunge some criminal violations related to marijuana, but there's so many convictions that are an appendage to a marijuana arrest that would take years to get through. So we're not undoing all the harm. That's mostly a legislative action that we have to pass a universal right of expungement, because truly getting at undoing the harm is going beyond just for marijuana charges, because so many stops and frisks and prosecutions of non-marijuana related was based upon a marijuana search, which was technically legal. And when Bloomberg was at the height of it, was stopping 500,000 people a year, 90+% of those people of color. So undoing the harm will take a long time. It's joint legislative action. As a district attorney, mostly what we can do, if we're being honest with people, is prospectively. To go backwards is really what the legislature must do, and it should do it. But a district attorney can set policies going forward much more easily than he or she can go backwards and undo the harm. That being said, it is a distinguishing fact in this race that there are some of us, mostly the non-prosecutors, who would decline to prosecute virtually all possession of controlled substances, essentially believing that if consenting adults do what they want to do in the privacy of their home or not creating a public safety issue, then we should just leave them alone. And I fall in that category. So much more harm is done by the prosecution of certain types of controlled substances. You know, I could agree with it, disagree with that. People should be doing it, but I don't want to use your tax dollars. I don't want to use all the different surroundings of the court practices to further incriminate people. It's a choice people make, and leave them alone to make that choice, and let consenting adults do what they want to do. Get the footprint of the courtroom out of it.
I appreciate the libertarian angle. I guess the final question is sort of how do you convince the NYPD to do the same with regard to cannabis possession, and working with them more broadly?
I mean, there's one specific, I'm on the assigned counsel plan. I represent people in Manhattan Criminal Court for the last 3+ years that can't afford attorneys. So I'm not just a legislator, I also have practical civil and criminal defense experience. What the NYPD in the city of New York has basically done, as you know, is they've gone from arrest to summonses. That still requires a person to take a half a day off of work, go to court, could navigate potential immigration consequences, and it could, but not likely, lead to further criminalization. But any contact with the courtroom and the criminal justice system, or criminal legal system more accurately, is a negative consequence. So that's what has to be stopped, in my opinion, and only the full legalization will get there. The legislature didn't do that, but I need to be creative and find ways maybe to elevate these summonses, because normally these summonses are not within the jurisdiction of the district attorney's office. They're civil summonses under the administrative code, which are determined by the city council and the mayor's office through city policy, specifically the administrative code. But I want to be creative. I want to take jurisdiction over these cases for purposes of dismissal only. But at the same time, I have to be careful of ever elevating a case to criminal status, even if for purposes of dismissal. But I want to look at doing those things because I think that's the way I change the conduct of the NYPD, to leave people alone. Going from arrest to summonses is, I wouldn't call it better, I'd call it less bad, but it still involves an unnecessary interaction between law enforcement and people doing something you and I know not to be criminal.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, it might seem difficult to elevate that case, but if it sets a precedent and undoes harms on a going forward basis, and that seems clever. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like a good idea. Dan, thank you so much. Or I should say, like, Assemblymember Quart. Any final parting words for the CannaGather community?
No, I want to thank you and this community that has fought for years. For
not as long as you have, actually. I started 2013.
That's
so thank you.
This bill was a struggle. In truth, it should have been passed 3-4 years ago. There is, I don't want to get into the history of it, but there's no good excuse why it took this long. I was there in Albany and frustrated by that, and county opt-outs and all this utter nonsense where things were delayed, and but finally it passed, and you, the advocacy community, deserve a ton of credit for this, because in truth, things get done in Albany most of the time because advocates don't give up. And that's what I've learned. I'm a legislator and a community lawyer running for district attorney, and I go forward with things with the mind as best as I can as an advocate. See what the problem is, know what your solution is, and be creative in getting there. And that's what I'll do as district attorney, not a strict constructionist. This is the law, I must follow it. That's how we've gotten into so many problems in Manhattan with overcriminalization, especially of communities of color, with marijuana as one of those major predicates.
Well, this was fascinating, and it's great to virtually meet you, and hope to meet you sometime very soon. Thank you so much, Dan / Assemblymember Quart.
Thank you, Josh.
Bye-bye. Okay, go into the Zoom admin. Okay, I think this is working. Tahanie, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm well. How things on your end? It's a long day for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, usually we start these things at 7 o'clock, but apparently you guys had something that popped up and pushed us back. So
today was the mother of all forums, just back to back nonstop. So
yeah, we picked the winner.
we're ending on a high note, pun intended.
It's all about the puns. And yeah, thank you for staying up 9:30, still going strong. So appreciate it. So yeah, this is our first time meeting. This is the CannaGather community and the virtual community in the future meeting you. They'd love to know sort of who are you and why are you running for district attorney?
Okay, great. Hi, Liz.
Oh, hi.
Sorry, one second.
Everybody's eager to get on. Well, my name is Tahanie. I'm a civil rights lawyer. And for over a decade, my focus has been on police accountability, discrimination, racism, representing victims of sexual assaults and children in suspension hearings. And my work is focused on identifying these abusive policies and practices and changing them. And that's what I want to do at this office, really just bring it up to speed. They say Manhattan is the center of the world, but it's really behind in the times. And we have a very draconian, closed off district attorney's office that has been really being guided by fear mongering and pressure from law enforcement and their union.
Did we lose you? Did you lose me?
A little bit.
Oh, okay, we're back.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay,
Okay, good to go.
are we good?
Yes, I think so. It's a little slow.
I'm here.
Okay. You said fear mongering and draconian.
Yeah,
And
we have a district attorney that is afraid to go up against law enforcement, that is afraid to think outside the box. And that's not how I operate. I'm somebody that takes a comprehensive, deep look into what's going on and address it from.
Uh-oh. Well, fun fact, if you guys are able to hear me, I ran a live video platform for about 4 years, and it's always difficult. If there weren't difficulties, then that just never happened.
Is
Sorry.
it still, can you see me fine?
Yeah, now, well, it's a little pixelated, but as long as you're talking, that's the most important.
Okay, if you can hear me fine. If not, I can try and switch to my cell phone if that works for you.
I think this is good for now.
Okay.
But yeah, now I think cell phone might be the move. Sorry, guys. Yeah, she's probably joining with her cell phone. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Liz was supposed to start a minute ago, so we are definitely behind. Sorry about that. Hello, that was fast.
Okay, this better?
Perfect. That is infinitely better. Amazing.
Okay.
Technology.
Okay. So we can take it from the top. So my name is Tahanie. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I've been practicing for over a decade in this city, identifying abusive policies and practices and change them, regardless of the agency, be it the NYPD, the fire department, or the Department of Education. And so for me, this fight is personal because when I was a kid around 14, my father was sentenced to 22 years in prison. And my mom was essentially single parent to 10 children. And we fought like hell to not become a statistics that say we're meant for the streets, that we're meant to be forgotten. And that's why I became a lawyer, specifically a civil rights lawyer, to push back on these systems that tell us that we're just supposed to do things a certain way without questioning why. And although I've been very successful as a civil rights attorney, I'm still doing damage control. I'm still coming in after the fact and trying to fix things that this system has broken. And so it's time to take this office over and start making it an ally towards progress, towards reform in our city. It has been one that has been controlled by law enforcement unions' fear-mongering, taking advantage of uncertainty and sometimes the ignorance of the public to pass stricter laws and to refuse to catch up with the times. And so we're at a historic moment in our city, in our country. Criminal justice reform has passed with the overwhelming majority on all the ballots. We've had 4 DAs here in Manhattan in the last 80 years. Every single district attorney has been a white male. And on the other end of that decision has been people of color. So if we're going to talk about systemic change, we have to start with electing somebody that has walked in the shoes of our communities, someone that is not just a one-track prosecutor mind, but someone that thinks about all the aspects that goes into being a district attorney, that goes into public safety, goes into public stability and ensuring resources in our communities. That's that perspective I want to bring to this office. It's what I want to bring to this race and catch up Manhattan with, some of the more progressive districts across the country.
That's amazing. And I guess in terms of your experience, do you have any in and around the issue of cannabis, or could you share your views on cannabis policy, if not?
Yeah, I think, I've been a criminal defense attorney early on in my career before I switched into civil rights law. And I think that the failed war on drugs was a pretext to destroy communities of color. We know that all communities use cannabis, marijuana at the same rate, but our jails and prisons were filled with Black and Latino, mostly men. And I am all for fully decriminalizing not only marijuana, but other controlled substances. I think this is an issue of public health, one where we need to have experts to come in and talk about this from a comprehensive manner, as opposed to, again, this knee-jerk reaction where we're just saying, let's just police, prosecute, and incarcerate, and not caring what that looks like or what that means. I think as New York moves to decriminalize marijuana, it's moving very slow. And I think, I commend the new legislation, but it just doesn't go far enough. Weed is not fully legal in New York State, so people should know that. You can still get fined and arrested and prosecuted for it. So we should be mindful of that. We need to fully decriminalize marijuana and, like I said, extend that to other substances and take it from a public health approach. I think that's the best way to address not only the systemic racism, but understand what it actually means. What does marijuana mean for different people and how it plays out in different communities?
That's amazing. And I guess extrapolating on that, in addition to the sort of decriminalization front, how do you envision sort of the guest question from LaMon, the equity side of things? How do you revitalize the communities that have been adversely affected by the failed war on drugs?
Yeah, that's the biggest priority. And I think the Drug Policy Alliance did a great job of ensuring that I think it's 40% of revenue from the proceeds of that sale go into Black and Brown communities that were destroyed by the criminalization of marijuana. That means put it in our schools, after school programs, bring the arts and extracurricular activities back, tutoring programs, community centers, job training, especially for those who are formerly incarcerated. Now they say, look, we'll do these communities a favor and we'll expunge their records. But these charges have been on their records for the last 20, 30, 40 years. So their obstacles and opportunities were already decided and dictated for them because of these actions. So now we have to do more. And that means ensuring that there's housing stability, employment stability, education stability, and that we're educating our youth as early as possible about not only cannabis, but different opportunities for themselves out there.
Very well said. Thank you for your understanding of that very important issue. I guess one last question from me. NYPD, as DA, how do you envision your relationship with them, particularly around cannabis?
Yeah, I think that we need to hold police accountable. I do a heavy amount of excessive force cases, so holding police accountable is something that is high priority on my list, especially because communities of color are overly policed, overly criminalized, and we need to move away from that. I think that marijuana has often been just a racist pretextual stop for officers to go into communities of color and then do whatever they want. And there's been no accountability for that. So I'm going to establish an arrest review unit that dissects the moment law enforcement comes into contact with civilians and understands everything that happened, from the background of that officer, how they came into contact, the demographics, and the statistics of the person that's being stopped, synthesize that data and make it publicly available so we can see what those abusive policies and practices are and change them.
Sounds great. I guess any final parting words for the CannaGather community on and DOD?
Yeah, I think, coming this far with attempting the legalization of marijuana has taken decades of advocacy and organizing. And so I commend you and others for being consistent and persistent. I think that this is an important conversation that we ensure our communities of color are central to, that licenses are equally distributed, and that the profit extends far and wide to ensure the stability of all communities. And look, if we get this right, this can really be a blueprint for decriminalization of other things, other substances, and show them how, it's not about not having accountability, it's about being as responsible as possible when it comes time to these things.
Shroom Gather coming soon. No, but seriously, Shroom Gather coming soon. But thank you so much.
It's happening. It's happening in other districts. I read up a lot about these things. I see what other districts are willing to do and what public health and drug experts are saying. So
it's medicine. So
it's out there.
Amen. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us and your eloquent articulation of equity and decriminalization of cannabis and shrooms and who knows what. So really appreciate you and your story, and best of luck in the race.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Liz. Liz, hello.
Oh, I thought you
got you.
forgot about me.
I didn't forget about you. Of course not. Is now still a good time? I know it's very late. I know.
I've got a limited energy, but yes, great.
Okay,
What's
well,
up?
I know that we are running late and it's late. Hello, Alvin.
Oh, there's my man Alvin. Alvin, they're running late.
Yeah. Sorry, Alvin. Well, I'll see you in about 10 minutes. Yeah, no, I know that it is late. We started, an hour and a half after we normally start, and then another 10 minutes, but Jill said we're still listening. They're still here. And whatever energy you have left and would like to muster, we'd love to learn a little bit about you and why you're running for district attorney.
Sure. I mean, I'm running for district attorney. I'm born and raised here in New York. I'm a 21-year, I'm the practitioner in this race. I was a DA for 6 years, and I did street crime, and then I also did white collar cases. And then I went to a firm for 2 years where I worked on the 9/11 terror funding case. And then after 2 years, I missed criminal law and I started my own law practice 12 and a half years ago with my partner, Jeremy Saland. We started Crotty Saland, and I've been representing everyday New Yorkers ever since. I think there's a real vacuum in the race, and why I entered it, of people, realistically, of what the job of the district attorney does and what the role is. The job of the district attorney is a law enforcement job. You have to work with law enforcement. At the same time, you have to make sure everyone gets a fair shot, everyone's treated equally. And I've been doing both on both sides of the courtroom, and that's why I entered the race.
Amazing. So were you part of the VCF, the 9/11 VCF?
Well, yeah, no. So I worked at Kreinler and Kreinler, which represented families, and under the Anti-Terrorism Act, you can sue state actors of state-sponsored terrorism. So various members of the Saudi government, a couple of different NGOs. So I did that for 2 years prior to at the DA's office. When I was in the investigative division for 2 years, and I worked on the oil for food case, which was Saddam Hussein said they had sanctions against Iraq. He said, you're starving the Iraqi children. So for food and medical supplies, he could sell oil for food and medical supplies. It wasn't 6 months before he perverted the whole system. And there was a surcharge on oil barrels that was going from the Bank of Jordan into the Bank of Iraq and into Saddam Hussein's pocket. And quite frankly, that's why I went to the DA's office for cases like that. I was a human rights scholar at law school at Fordham. I was a Crowley Scholar in Human Rights. I wanted to be a trial lawyer, but I also wanted to do, complex international big investigations. And I got the very opportunity to do what I wanted when I went to the DA's office, because they used to be known for doing really interesting, complicated cases. It's kind of fallen off the wayside in the past 10 years, but so so I went from the oil for food case to Kreinler and Kreinler to work on the 9/11 terror funding case. But then I really decided there was real honor amongst thieves, and I was going back to criminal law because it was a lot more interesting.
Got it. Yeah, I didn't, to your point about that stuff not being done in the last 10 years, I didn't even know that they took on cases like that, but that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you have experience? I mean, you've worked on some pretty phenomenal cases. Do you have experience in and around cannabis policy, cannabis enforcement, or views thereon?
No, I mean, listen, God bless the legislature. It was about time, so, I mean, that's kind of how I feel. I've always, it's funny when, I've represented a lot of people who've been arrested for marijuana cases. They largely ended up being, children of neurotic parents who got arrested at various places around New York. And, I would have to explain to them that you could have me, you could have F. Lee Bailey from the grave, but it didn't matter. You got the marijuana ACD, but they still wanted me to go to court. So I've done a tremendous amount of marijuana cases. I also actually prosecuted a marijuana case when I was a DA, in full disclosure. It was a guy who was selling marijuana in Washington Square Park. It was like his fifth arrest. We had a whole trial about it. And I remember at the end, this was in 2002 or something like that. I remember at the end of the trial, the judge said, "Oh, I'll hear you on jail," because we got convicted. We got convicted because he put his girlfriend on the stand and said, he said, "Oh," I said, "Where were you in relationship to the arch in Washington Square?" She said, "There's no arch in Washington Square." And I sat down because I was like, okay, she wasn't in Washington Square. But so at the end of the trial, the judge said, "Oh, I'll hear you on jail." And I was like, there's no need for jail. I was like, maybe some community service. I mean, I never thought cannabis was ever even when I was a DA and, holding up the law. I never thought it was a jail worthy offense. And, you know, and I, as I said, I've represented a lot of people who've been accused of smoking marijuana in public. So I think it was high time, no pun intended, that that the legislature, you know, came back with what they did. And I think that, you know, so I think it was the right move by the legislator.
Yeah, it's funny you mention it because I grew up playing chess in Washington Square Park, and the arrests of individuals that I played with and around where I was playing was sort of one of the formative moments for me to want to get involved in this sort of crusade.
Well, you know, funny enough, when I was a DA, they used to have the great 420, you know, in April was the great American smoke up. And they used to, like, it was always, the marijuana ACD was always up. Like, so it was like, if you got rearrested, you couldn't like get the marijuana ACD again because you had an open case from last year. I mean, I think it was just, you know, its time had come and gone in terms of what are we doing here and what is the real end goal here.
And so if you're elected district attorney, how do you envision leveraging that position to sort of revitalize some of the communities that have been historically adversely affected by the failed war on drugs? And that's sort of a guest question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the social, you know, I mean, I can't really think about it, but the societal equity and having people of color get the licenses to sell marijuana, I think that that's really the right thing, and the social equity involved in that. And I think, quite frankly, I mean, when I read it, I was like, well, this is really kind of a model for so much business that we should really, for city business. It doesn't really have much to do with the district attorney's office, but I think putting social equity into state contracts or city contracts is really an interesting way to go. And I hope it's very useful, because I think that city and state contracts should have social equity policies, and putting, you know, because in order to have like public safety in every neighborhood, which is, you know, everyone's right, I think you have to have really neighborhood revitalization and economic opportunities in every neighborhood, and really vibrant economic opportunities. So the fact, if we can really give those to those, have a social equity policy that provides for that, I think that's only to the good of everyone here.
And one last quick question. So you had mentioned that the DA role is sort of a law enforcement role. How do you envision, I mean, given your extensive experience in and around the role, how would you envision how you would interface with the NYPD, particularly around issues of cannabis?
Well, I mean, I have the endorsement of the ranking NYPD officers, detectives, lieutenants, captains, sergeants, and I've been endorsed by Ray Kelly and Dick Condon, 2 former police commissioners. But I come at it from a different point of view, because I think that you have to work with the police, and I think you have to work with the police to really understand what's going on in neighborhoods. But it's not just working with the police; it's also working within communities and really having, you know, a community bureau, not tied to the crime statistics, but a community bureau where really tenant leaders, community organizers really have a direct line to the DA's office to say, here's what's going on in our neighborhood. Here are the crimes we're seeing. Here's where we need help. Because I think over-policing is a problem, but I think under-policing is just as much of a problem. And we're not going to get the balance right until we have everyone at the table having the same conversations, and also having conversations where community leaders and tenant organizers can call directly to the DA's office and say, here's what the problems are in the precincts. And I mean, I think there was a very interesting New Yorker article that came out about 2 weeks ago about the 73rd precinct and who the precinct commander was, and how the change of precinct commanders really affected the neighborhood, and how neighborhoods and community leaders should have some say in who becomes the precinct commander, because it dictates so much of the relationship between law enforcement and the community.
I love that. I would love to keep the conversation going about that. I mean, best of luck in the race, but either way, I mean, I think you touched on something that is like super, super important. So would love to keep the conversation going. And any last words to share?
You know, I appreciate you guys' time and interest in the race. It's an interesting one. And I just think, you know, having someone who knows both sides of the courtroom with institutional knowledge is really how you can make change. I am running as a moderate. I'm very proud of that fact. I'm not shying away from it, but I really do think at the end of the day, it's an apolitical job where you're there to make objective, right decisions about what to do in every community and for every victim and for every defendant. And that's kind of the lens that I come at it with. And I'm always happy to share my vision. My email is lizcrotty2021@gmail. Stay in touch and read that New Yorker article because it's very interesting. And I think very illustrative of how we move forward with policing in different communities.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the insight and best of luck.
All right, and say hi to Alvin.
Okay, well, let's just bring him on. You can say hi to him yourself.
All right.
Haven't done that one yet tonight, but there's a first for everything. You guys can say hi to each other.
I said, oh, say hi to Alvin. I was like, God bless, pulling up the rear.
What's going on, Liz? Liz, I will share, I guess, with you and everyone else. I'm actually at my 30th year high school reunion.
Oh, nice. Trinity,
yes.
Going strong.
Yes, yes.
Well, enjoy. I won't keep you, but it was always good to see you. Talk to you guys
Good
later.
to see you too.
Bye.
Okay. How do we get rid of our? Okay, we got what high school is that?
Trinity School.
Okay, amazing. A lot of good friends who went to Trinity. So
class of '91. We're out here in full strength. Well, not full strength, but
you're there.
But decent strength.
Decent strength. So Alvin, before this, I got a phone call, and someone had asked me if I was interested in chatting about the district attorney's race, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm actually doing an event tonight," and it was someone from Color for Change encouraging me to vote for you. So Alvin, tell everyone in the CannaGather community why we should vote for you.
Definitely. So yeah, look, I'm honored to have Color Change's endorsement.
Color Change, sorry, not for it.
Yeah. And look, I have lived these issues, and I think Color Change values that for the past almost 50 years. I grew up in Harlem during the 80s, during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic. I had a gun pointed at me 6 times, 3 by police officers during lawless stops, and then 3 by people who weren't police officers. So I knew from a very early age the challenges of our system. My advocacy started then. I filed a civilian complaint after that first lawless NYPD stop, and then I haven't stopped. I went off to college and law school and came right back to Harlem and Manhattan, and focused on public safety and civil rights since then, working as a civil rights lawyer and a criminal defense lawyer, becoming a federal prosecutor, and ultimately becoming the chief deputy attorney general of New York, where, among other things, helped lead the charge against stop and frisk. I issued a pioneering report showing that of the stops during a 4-year period, only 0.1% resulting in a conviction for a gun offense, and maybe of particular interest to this group, documenting the racial disparities from marijuana prosecutions arising from those arrests. Now I'm a professor at New York Law School, co-director of Racial Justice Project. In that capacity, I have the honor of representing Gwen Carr, Eric Garner's mother, in a transparency lawsuit against Mayor de Blasio. So all these experiences, inform both professional and personal what I want to do as the DA's office: shrink the footprint drastically. So much of what the DA's office does not focus on public safety, address the racial disparities. We've got really a system that's rife with them at every step along the way. Have one standard for justice, and then really focuses on things that really do matter in terms of public safety, use of guns and gun trafficking, and also heinous sexual assaults. And for me, all this work is personal, right? It comes out of growing up. I learned what a collect call was with someone calling from a prison, family member. My reentry plans come from my time with my brother-in-law living with me for a year plus after he was released from incarceration. My time working side by side with survivors of violent crime arises from my draw on my experiences, having had a knife to my neck, a semi-automatic weapon to my head, and a homicide victim on my doorstep growing up. My police accountability work, which has been a through line of all my work, is based on those early stops, and also the fact that my children are fast approaching the age when I was first stopped. And all of that informs my function for the job. And I would just say, I think there are three key qualities we need. We need a manager. I've overseen an office of 1,500, delivered progressive change. We need someone who knows the judgment to which cases to bring and which not. I've indicted 2 mayors, one for fraud, one for bribery. The former majority Senate leader of the state Senate led the charge against the Trump Foundation, but also didn't grow up in the DA's office, so haven't done those churn cases that were really led to the kind of stops that I experienced. And ultimately, I think we need a DA. We've had 3 elected DAs in 75 years. I'm going to go out on a limb on them and say none of them experienced half of what I just told you about. And I think it's time that we have a change and put someone in office who's lived this stuff as well as having worked on these issues.
Yeah, I don't know many people that have experienced what you've experienced, what you just listed that you experienced. So kudos to you. I guess you've listed a multitude of very important issues, arguably more important than cannabis. But that being said, like, what is your view on cannabis? Have you worked with any cannabis cases? I would almost imagine that the Eric Garner case tragically sort of fits into the sort of same bucket of general police overstepping around quote unquote possession. Like, what has been your experience? How has that shaped you?
I think it does. Look, I mean, the very first stop, they didn't specify cannabis, but they falsely accused me of being a drug dealer when they put the gun in my face. I think it was, part and parcel of the militarized policing that, we saw back then and still see today. I mentioned the stop and frisk report where we documented the marijuana racial disparities coming out of that. And, I mentioned I'm at my high school reunion, spent a lot of time on the Upper West Side as well as on Harlem. And I saw the different treatment, downtown with my high school peers. Marijuana's been, marijuana. I mean, literally, I would say it blew my mind. Literally, as a kid, I took the M10 bus down 8th Avenue every day, and I saw a lot of differences. And one of them was that, my friends who did certain things, including, smoking marijuana, would get in trouble uptown. Downtown, it was viewed as a rite of passage. So, marijuana has been legal for white folks my entire life. And it's just one example of the racial disparities in our system I'm running for DA's office to address them. And it's critically important. I mean, it's such a terrible signal to our system of administrative justice when we have, just 2 different ways of doing something. Literally, there was almost like there was a line at 110th Street. And that's just a terrible thing to me. And I mean, I tell my law enforcement partners the effect it had on me. I mean, I didn't go to a full-time prosecutor job until I was 10 years out of law school, because I did not think that was for me because of those early experiences. So I tell law enforcement partners all the time, the stop you do today, the policies, decisions we adopt, they affect our trust in our communities and law enforcement. And without that trust, you can't make cases. You can't make cases without victims, without witnesses. So I really try to be very affirmative and conscious about saying, I've done both civil rights work and what people would traditionally call public safety work. But to me, that they're inextricably interwoven, right? The right to walk down my street safely is a civil right. And in my public safety, I can't truly have if I don't trust the police. So to me, that they are part and parcel, really 2 sides of a coin.
So I guess the sort of next question is, if you're elected district attorney, how do you, and this question is a guest question from LaMon Bland, is how do you implement restorative measures in communities that have been affected by cannabis criminalization?
Well, thank you to LaMon. I've known LaMon for a long time. I know he's a key leader on these issues, and someone cares, very deeply about the equity issues. Look, I think the first step is, what do we prosecute? More than 80% of the city's docket is misdemeanors and violations, and the universe of people accused of those crimes is more than 80% people of color. So we need to be looking, and I would charge every single ADA under my system, like, the case you're about to charge, how does it advance public safety? And if it doesn't, don't charge it. It's just that simple. We got a lot of cases that don't advance it. And then for the things that we do charge, look, is this a case that we can resolve with a diversion program? Is this a case that is something that we should be using restorative justice? And I think the answer to that is yes, almost all the time. I'm going to offer that option to survivors, and obviously it's up to them because it doesn't work if survivors don't opt into it. But I think it should be presented to them, in almost every single case. I know LaMon knows well the expression "hurt people hurt people." We spent some time living on the same block in a similar environment, and much of our harms can be addressed through the restorative justice process of really, going back to this concept of community trust. I mean, one interesting dynamic that people professionally will learn, but I knew growing up. I mean, Monday's witness is Wednesday's victim and is Friday's defendant. And so really trying to work that through in a way, we don't have you can have a case where literally someone is the victim in one case and they're defendant in another. And sometimes the best way to resolve that is a restorative justice circle to get to what is driving the harm. And so I'm a big proponent of offering survivors that as an option.
Amazing. And I guess one last question from me. I don't mean to keep you, but the NYPD, interfacing with them, trying to resolve a lot of these issues. I mean, I think you've sort of outlined a lot of great opportunities for amelioration, but how do you envision, if you're elected, actually implementing them by working with the NYPD?
Yeah, look, I have spent a career doing both at the same time, right? So, I mean, I prosecuted an FBI agent for lying, and at the same time was working with the FBI on public safety cases, and had the conversation. There were, people like, oh, how could you do that case? And I said, well, look, do you lie? Do you obstruct justice? The issue isn't with the case. The issue is with the conduct. And his conduct, to go back to the issue of community trust, is making your job harder. I said to the agents, right? He's impairing the community trust. I've had that conversation a lot. When I was at the Attorney General's office, we charged a sitting district attorney with official misconduct. You can imagine the reaction from the other district attorneys and law enforcement. So you got to be truly independent. You got to have resolve. You have to build relationships before you bring a case like that. So you have people understand that, like, you're not just doing it to do it. Because some people did say, oh, well, this is is this? I had people ask me, quote unquote, are you going to do a witch hunt? I said, no, look, we're following the facts. If the facts take us to a district attorney or a police officer, we're going to go there. But if they don't, we're going to say that too. And we certainly had investigations where we said, look, the officer's account is corroborated by all the evidence. And so it's about being independent. What I would tell my team is, look, someone's always going to be upset in these kind of high profile cases involving law enforcement conduct. It's liberating. We were going to do the right thing anyway. But even if you try to reverse engineer it to make everyone happy, you fail at that. So just embrace the fact that you will not make everyone happy. Do the right thing, and justice is its own reward. I used to tell my team that all the time.
Amazing. I want to give a shout out to Rich from your team for helping coordinate and putting up with me. So thank him. Thank you for staying up. I know 30-year reunion, that's an important thing, so I don't want to keep you from it. But if you have any sort of parting words to share, feel free. Feel free.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for your leadership. I mean, I think it's an important conversation to have, which is why I wanted to join. I thank you for the scheduling flexibility. And look, this is, I think, illustrative of what we need to do. I mean, the work you've done has really addressed the core racial disparity issue, and the racial disparity issues, I think, go hand in hand with broader justice, fairness, and safety for all of us. And so I think using that lens to address other problems in our system is quite apt. And I'm glad that you've really drawn up a blueprint for that. So I thank you for your leadership and the group, and again for your scheduling courtesies. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, I wish it were just correlation, but it's definitely, unfortunately, causation, and that needs to change. And it sounds like you would be well equipped to handle that on a going forward basis. But either way, appreciate meeting you. I read your bio, very impressive, and you didn't even mention half of it on here, so humble as well. But just want to thank you and have a good night, and thank you, everyone. This is going to be very difficult. So many incredible qualified people on tonight, and I appreciate you joining for your scheduling flexibility. I'm down to do whatever works for you. So thank you so much, and I'm honored. Thank you to all the CannaGathers, that are watching now and will watch in the future. Have a good night. Thank you,
Night.
Alvin. Bye-bye.